Good evening to those bored enough to watch. As many of us know, the Duck Life series first began on Adobe Flash, back when they were in their heyday prior to the death of Flash. Thankfully, these old experiences are preserved and playable. All you need is a Flash emulator or Adobe Flash player itself and the SWF files, and you can run the original Flash versions of these games. In this video, I want to discuss said versions and bring up comparisons with the Steam versions of each respective game wherever I feel it's necessary, and ultimately answer the question of whether you should play these Flash versions over the Steam ones. Keep in mind, I won't be talking about Duck Life Treasure Hunt in this video, despite it being the last Duck Life game to be made in Flash. I unfortunately couldn't run the game, as it wouldn't even let me go past the loading screens. There are a few differences between itself and the remake that released after Flash stopped being supported. However, as I couldn't get the game running, I had to leave it out of this video. So, with that said, let's discuss the Flash files. Seeing as how these games were mostly played on web browsers during Flash's heyday, there are a lot of things in these versions of the games that are hidden off screen. Thankfully, if you're on a Flash emulator or Adobe Flash player, you can manipulate the size of the window to reveal such things. Namely, you'll see that the duck's food is loaded just off screen, which can be interacted with and given to your duck without needing to buy any of it. There's also this gentleman here. These goose characters are actually leftovers from a discarded version of the game titled Duck Life All Grown Up. According to a Reddit AMA, this version was supposed to see the ducks gradually change in appearance based on their skill level. While this concept was reworked into Duck Life 3, these goose characters remained off-screen in the Flash versions of Duck Life 1 and a bit of Duck Life 2 if you know where to look. Oddly enough, the color of the goose character changes depending on the screen you're on. In the overworld, it's white, whereas in the menu screens, it's brown, alongside a duck without any outline, eyes or legs now appearing on screen. As for the actual gameplay, the controls tend to feel somewhat unresponsive in my experience. The most notable example I could find was in the running minigame. Your duck doesn't jump until a few moments after your input. On the surface, this seems like an insignificant detail to bring up, but it is something that is very noticeable during a playthrough, as despite it being something rather easy to adjust to, it often led to me losing the minigame. Another thing I noticed during these minigames is that there are small details in the animations that don't make a return in the retro pack version of the game. Once again, it's a small detail, but especially when playing these two versions of the game consecutively, it's something I noticed, and when I think about it, I do find it quite puzzling as to why it isn't in the retro pack version of the game. As many of us know, in the final race we go up against this duck here, which I personally liked the detail of there being a subtle glow around it in the Flash version. Once more, this is a detail that doesn't return in the retro pack version of the game. Speaking of, any exploits concerning things that are off screen are removed in this version of the game as well. The retro pack version of the game sees everything being remastered, with some small details being added in the overworld, such as these wooden structures that weren't in the Flash version of the game. The maximum energy level has been changed from 50 to 150, and the ducks also tend to move slower during races in comparison to the Flash version. Furthermore, the issue of the controls being unresponsive is fixed. That's pretty much everything I have to say about these two versions of the game. Both have the same experience at their core, with slight differences between them. One thing I've noticed is that there is a web version of the game that doesn't really have any differences aside from a few visual ones. Once more, you can see things that are supposed to be off screen in the Flash version of Duck Life 2. Namely, the brown goose makes a return if you go to the menu screens within the game, and much like the first game, you can access the food that's hidden off screen and feed it to your duck. Specifically with this game, there's also a level up button as well, which does exactly what it alludes to doing, leveling up every statistic by 1 every time you press it. Purchasing new maximum levels in this game are locked behind winning races, in which this feature is removed in the retro pack version of the game. I think that this is a good removal because it convolutes things less and allows for more varied approaches when playing the game. Some may want to get all of the training out of the way first before doing any races, or some may want to do the races as they go along. This feature was something that forced the latter approach, and removing it allows people to do whichever they please. Speaking of the retro pack version of this game, not much was really added aside from remastering the Flash version of the game. If anything, it removes content. Some of these removals serve the game better, but others only seem to take away more content that was in the Flash version of the game. For example, upon beating the Flash version of the game, you could unlock the level editor and the cheats menu. The level editor wasn't anything special and barely worked in my experience. However, I definitely would have liked to see its issues fixed and included in the retro pack version. Furthermore, the cheats menu was generally a fun bit of extra content for the player to mess around with if they wanted to. Namely, it allowed for them to get seeds for free, allowed extra customization in the overworld by choosing the time of day it displays, and it also allows the player to experience extreme versions of the training minigames. While they are just harder versions of the pre-existing ones, it would have been nice to see them included in the retro pack. With Duck Life 3, there is one notable thing off screen aside from the usual food being loaded there. In the final area prior to facing the final duck, you can see a background with purple neon lights. I'm not sure what this is used for, but ever since I noticed it was there, I always wondered what it was used for. In the retro pack version of the game, there's, once again, removal of details in the animations such as jumping. Another thing that was removed in the retro pack version of the game is within the climbing minigame for the third area. In the Flash version, you'd have to constantly be climbing upwards as there's lava below you. However, said lava is removed in the retro pack version version of the game. I personally think that it added a lot more challenge, so once more, I'm only left to wonder about the reason for its removal. Additionally, the Ultra Pack version is generally a less buggier experience. Duck Life 4 probably has the most changes between the different versions of the game. Prior to the release of Duck Life 9, the Steam version was updated to include the number in its title, though aside from that, I didn't really notice any other differences between the Steam versions of the game. So, for this part of the video, I'll be discussing the Flash version of the game and the latest version of the Steam port at the time of making this video. On the surface, the most notable thing is the different UI and appearance between the differing versions. The Flash version also has more detailed animations, as can be seen during the introductory cutscene and the one that depicts the volcano erupting. Much like the previous games, the food is always loaded off screen and can be fed to your ducks without needing to spend any of your money. A good addition the Steam release makes is including an elevated structure to place your ducks on when you want to feed them. This avoids having to throw other ducks across the screen when you want to feed a specific one, since they all start running towards the food the moment it appears on screen. Another thing that's different between the two versions is the music within. While it's mostly the same, there are different tracks that play in the Steam version compared to the Flash version. For example, the running minigame plays a different track in the Steam version, the overworld music from the glacier is slightly different between the two versions, and the climbing training music is completely different in the Steam version. When it comes to deciding which is better, I personally believe that it's a matter of preference. I personally prefer some of the music from the Steam version, but at the same time, I also prefer others from the Flash version. One thing I believe that the Flash versions of all these games do better than the Steam versions is having more accessibility options in terms of performance. While one may argue that these games aren't that graphically demanding, and for that reason, your PC probably won't have too much of a difficult time trying to run Duck Life 1 of all games. However, that never stopped these Flash versions from having these optimization settings anyway. In these versions, you can select how graphically intense you want the game to display itself, with Duck Life 4 giving you this option the moment you start a new game and having it available in the options menu like its predecessors. The Steam versions of these games don't have these options, and while valid of a point it may be that these games don't really need them, I just don't see why it would be included in the Flash versions and not these ones. It would have been a useful addition regardless, as some people may want a higher frame rate regardless or just may have issues running the game in general. With that aside, another thing I want to talk about is the difference in length between the two versions. While fundamentally they're the same experience, the Steam version focuses on modernizing the Duck Life formula into what it eventually evolved into in later installments. For this reason, it adds a lot of things that make the experience shorter in comparison to the Flash version. Said Flash version took me around 2.5 hours to complete, while the Steam version only took me around 1.5. In my opinion, this is because the Steam version allows you to play whichever training minigame you want, whereas the Flash version forces you into playing all 3 consecutively. This means that for the Steam version, you only have to master 1 of 3 training minigames for every statistic, whereas in the Flash version of the game, you need to master all 3 if you want to level up quicker. With there being less to learn and master in the Steam version, I'm only led to believe that to be one of the main reasons for it feeling like a shorter experience compared to the Flash version of the game. Speaking of, the Flash versions of these games tend to have a few bugs in them, and Duck Life 4 is no exception. Whenever you start anew and try to delete your old save file, the duck you get after beating the fire duck from your previous save file will appear in the new one. This is fixed in the Steam version. The climbing minigame has this strange bug that prevents you from climbing the ladders even when you're pressing the button to do so. This hindered gameplay and often resulted in me losing. Once again, this is fixed in the Steam version. There's also this weird bug that takes you back to the grass line whenever you press a duck's face when they challenge you to a race. It doesn't work with every duck, but it does with a few. Once more, this doesn't occur in the Steam version of the game, which is overall a more stable experience in my opinion, though that isn't to say that it doesn't have a few bugs of its own. Some of it is useful for cheesing the game and leveling up without doing anything, and other times it can prevent you from making progress, though it can usually be fixed by just going back to the overworld. The Steam version also removes other miscellaneous things such as race requirements, which was present in the Flash version. It also removes Joe, the running trainer, giving you a brief tutorial before the final race. Speaking of, the final race is slightly longer in the Steam version in comparison to the Flash version. Overall, I believe that the Flash versions of these games are good. How can they not be? At their core, they're the same experience as the modern versions that are often advertised and pushed. However, as we've seen in this video, there are a few differences between these two versions. Whether it be slight ones such as exploits, details, or bugs, or entirely different changes in the art styles, the structure of the game, or the music, these are genuinely great ways to experience them if you're familiar with Duck Life. As for whether I would recommend them over the Steam versions, I personally wouldn't. The bugs within them are ones that I personally find to be a hindrance to gameplay, but that isn't to say that they aren't worth experiencing. Specifically with Duck Life 4, I remember playing the Flash version of that game when I was much younger, but nowadays with modern iterations that enhance the experience in ways that I've described in this video, I personally tend to prefer the Steam version more than the Flash one, even if there are things that I think are better executed in the latter in comparison to the former. With that aside, this has been the Duck Life Flash Files. So, there's the video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I apologize for this video taking so long. Playing essentially 8 Duck Life games took a lot longer than I expected. Either way, I hope you all liked this video. If you want to view the list of games I want to make videos about in the future, then you can always do so through the link in the description. Additionally, if you want to follow me, then my socials will be linked in the description, as well as any afterthoughts or messages I may want to add. with that, I haven't really got much else I want to say, so I'll see you all in my next video. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening.